This is my story, or at least the part of it that I've never really shared. I probably deserve every harsh word that will come in the comments section. Still, I want to share, because I sincerely wish someone had warned me when I stood on the threshold of what I thought was a bit of excitement, but ultimately ruined so much. My name is Rachel. I am 41 years old and live alone in an apartment that I sublet. Before everything happened, I worked as a marketing manager for a shoe company. It was a good position, high salary, lots of responsibility, and plenty of prospects. But my life took a turn when I succumbed to the temptation of having an affair with a former colleague named Mark. That affair cost me my marriage to Ethan, the man I once believed I would grow old with. Ethan was everything I was not. Calm, constantly caring, organized, and very kind-hearted. I used to joke that he was a little too good for me. Ironically enough, maybe that was true. I saw him recently for the first time in 3 years. I was standing outside a cafe on a street corner where I was just passing by. Through the window, I spotted Ethan. He wasn't alone. Opposite him sat a woman whom I later found out is named Maya Bennett, and she is his current partner. I knew that Ethan had met someone new because a mutual friend, Melissa Grant, had mentioned it a few times in passing. But I had never seen her, and I was not at all prepared for my own reaction. As soon as I saw him, it felt like the ground slipped away beneath me. A knife-sharp sense of loss cut through me when I saw his warm smile. He truly looked happy, maybe happier than I've ever seen him. And he looked good, better than I remember. Slightly fit, confident, with that quiet aura of calm that's always been his hallmark. The difference now was that he kind of radiated, in a way he didn't used to when we were together. It hurt to see it. I stood out there for a while until my legs started to go numb. I had no idea what to do. Should I wave? Go in? Sneak away? I felt like a stranger with my nose pressed against the glass, like a hungry creature looking into a warm house. And next to him sat her. Tall, beautiful, younger than me. She held his hand across the table. I saw her smile and could almost feel her energy, far out through the glass. I did nothing. I just stood there and watched. It might only have been a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Eventually, I tore myself away and hurried off. I didn't know where to go, but I had to get away. I was dizzy from all the emotions welling up inside me. It felt like someone had scraped open an old, already infected wound. I thought I was ready to see him again, but I had no idea. I got home to my apartment and sank down on my bed. I stared straight up at the ceiling, went through 1,000 scenarios, 1,000 old memories. I heard his voice in my head. Remembered how he used to look at me with his gentle gaze. I remembered how he placed his hand over mine on the table, the same way he now placed his hand on Maya's. My first impulse was to cry, but I felt empty, as if I'd used up all my tears. Or maybe not. After a while, they came anyway, in a rushing wave of regret. I sobbed loudly and uncontrollably because I was completely alone and didn't have to pretend to be strong. I'd never stopped missing him, even though I was the one who destroyed us. When I'd pulled myself together a bit, I walked around the room looking for my phone. I wanted to text Melissa. She's an old friend of both of us, but she remained neutral after the divorce. I understand her position. She liked us both, and it felt unfair to demand that she choose sides. She never chose sides, but I know she likes Ethan more, or at least trusts him more, after everything that happened. I found my phone and typed something along the lines of, "I saw Ethan today. Can we talk?" I added a sad emoji, even though I'm a bit ashamed that, at my age, I still use emojis in desperate situations. Melissa answered quite quickly. She wrote that she could meet me the next day. It was a relief because I really needed to hear the truth. I knew that Melissa had more insight into Ethan's life than I did, and I wanted to know everything. I lay awake all night. I tried reading a book, but it fell from my hands after just a few pages. I tried watching a show, but my thoughts kept wandering to Ethan and Maya. I don't remember what I ate for dinner or how time passed, but eventually it was morning. I got up, showered, and tried to pick out clothes that weren't too wrinkled. I no longer had a flashy job requiring a perfect exterior, but as a freelance consultant, I still wanted to look presentable in case I needed to take a video meeting. Nothing happened that morning, so I had plenty of time to worry about how the conversation with Melissa would go. When we met, I ordered a coffee, but I barely drank it. I think I was sitting there staring into it when she arrived and hugged me. Our friendship had become a bit stiff and cautious after the divorce. She sat down across from me and looked at me with that gaze that said, "I know you feel terrible, but I don't know how to help you." I asked her to tell me everything she knew. I said, "Don't hold back, I really want to know." She hesitated, maybe because she was afraid the truth would hurt me even more. Finally, she began to speak. She said that Ethan had gone into a kind of cocoon after the divorce. He worked out, and spent time almost exclusively with his sister and his nephew. None of our old friends saw him at parties or couples dinners. He didn't go out dating, as far as anyone knew anyway. I know he was devastated, and it sounds unreasonable, but part of me was relieved that he didn't immediately throw himself into a new romance. I know it sounds selfish, but I felt that maybe I mattered after all, that he didn't just erase me. Melissa told me that he gradually changed, for the better. He worked out more often, took on bigger projects at the architecture firm, got involved in various charity projects. About a year later, he met Maya at a charity gala where he was representing his firm's side of the sponsorship. Maya was the physician in charge of a fundraising campaign for sick children. They started talking, exchanged contact details, and after a few weeks, they were seen together. Melissa said it was obvious they fell for each other quickly, but that it wasn't a fling, but rather two mature people who were ready to build something new. I pictured Ethan and Maya, he with his calm, caring personality, and she with her medical profession, her commitment, and her natural ability to care for and nurture others. Of course he was drawn to such a person. She must have been like a balm for his wounded soul. I forced a smile, thanked Melissa for telling me. It felt like someone pulled the rug out from under me, but I had to act controlled. Melissa placed her hand over mine and said, "I'm sorry, but I think he's happy now." I nodded and said I understood, but inside I felt like a balloon slowly losing air. I excused myself and went home, where I broke down. I cried until I got a headache and had to lie down. I wish I could say it was the first time I cried over my loss, but that would be a lie. I've been crying for 3 years. I've tried to move on too, but not very successfully. I've kept my distance from Mark. He was the reason I lost Ethan, but the truth is I can't put all the blame on him. I chose to start that affair. I've met a few men, but after 1 or 2 dates, I lose interest. I compare them to Ethan. Maybe it's time to tell how it really went down when my marriage to Ethan fell apart. 3 years is a long time, but the memories are painfully sharp. It started as an innocent friendship. I was the marketing manager. Mark was one of our top salespeople. We had worked together for a few years. He was charming, impulsive, funny in a way Ethan wasn't. I was drawn to him even though I loved Ethan's calm and stability. But I was bored. I know it sounds awful, but I was restless. I found Ethan too predictable. Every time I looked at Mark, it was like I got an injection of adrenaline. It started with an afterwork where we ended up next to each other at the bar, and it ended with us dancing closely on the dance floor. Nothing happened that night, but a spark was lit. Over the following weeks, we started sending personal text messages. We met for lunch, just the two of us. We talked about work, but we also talked about our lives. Mark was passionate. He constantly had new ideas, new projects, new impulses. He was like a hyperactive machine gun of energy, and I was drawn to that. By comparison, Ethan felt flat, even though in reality, he was an incredibly warm person. I wish I had understood that the excitement I was looking for was just a phase. One night, we worked late, Mark and I. We were preparing a campaign presentation. First, we sat in the conference room typing on our computers. Then it turned into small talk, jokes, and suddenly he kissed me. It was probably a mistake right then and there, but I kissed him back. It triggered a mixture of anxiety and euphoria. I was scared but also alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. We went home that evening without going further than a kiss, but I remember the feeling that I now carried a secret I was both ashamed of and wanted to explore more. I tried to avoid him for a few days, but when I saw him in the corridor, that flutter in my stomach unfolded again. It wasn't long before we started having a real affair. We met in secret, always under the excuse that we were working. I lied to Ethan and said we needed to work late, that we had important weekend meetings. In reality, I was at a hotel with Mark. My guilt toward Ethan became more palpable each time I saw him. He was so understanding when I said work demanded so much of me. He never complained. Sometimes he suggested we go away together for a weekend, but I made up excuses. I think he started to suspect something in the end. He asked strange questions like, "How was the conference?" even though he knew it was canceled. I lied poorly and noticed I was losing track. Still, I continued. I was obsessed with Mark, with the feeling he gave me. I wanted that confirmation. It's hard to explain in retrospect, but it was as if I was searching for something. I felt unappreciated, inadequate, and when Mark gave me attention, it filled a void I didn't even know I had. The sex was incredible, but it turned out it was because it was new, forbidden, and secret. After everything fell apart, there was nothing left. Everything collapsed one evening when Ethan confronted me with some texts he had found. They were deleted from my phone, but he had seen them before I deleted them. I tried to deny it, said it was just a misunderstanding. He didn't believe me because he had seen far too clear evidence. I remember how he shook as he explained that he couldn't believe I had done such a thing. He asked me to be honest. I remember crying and admitting I had made a mistake, but I promised it had only happened once. I begged and pleaded for forgiveness. He was furious but also devastated. Still, in one last desperate attempt, he was willing to give me a chance if I really laid all the cards on the table and broke it off with Mark. In a weak moment, I thought I could do it. But when Ethan dug deeper and found all our secrets, the weekend trips that weren't actually work-related, the transactions from our joint account where I had used our money to impress Mark, and especially that secret email address where I had written destructive things about our marriage, then it was over. Ethan couldn't forgive me. I had gone way too far. I had humiliated my husband in front of Mark. It was part of our sex. I tried to explain that it was part of a role play and nothing I really meant. Something I said in the heat of the moment and not for real. But it was so awful that Ethan couldn't forgive me. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he told me he had found the emails. I tried to explain that I was confused, that I didn't mean everything I'd written, but he said nothing. He just looked at me as if he was seeing a stranger. I think that was the worst moment of my life. I had betrayed the finest person I've ever known. I knew I would probably never get his trust back. And that's how it turned out. He packed a bag and left that night. A few weeks later, I had a divorce petition in my hand. Mark and I had already begun to drift apart by then. I think I was starting to realize he wasn't worth it. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. When the divorce was finalized, Ethan disappeared from my life. I tried contacting him, sending emails, calling, but he never responded. I asked Melissa and some other mutual friends to forward letters to him, but I think he just threw them away. He needed to move on, and I know I must have hurt him unimaginably. I don't blame him for shutting me out. Every day afterward felt like a new self-accusation. I lost my job too. Mark got fired first, for other reasons, poor sales results and mishandling key customers, and I felt guilty that I'd even gotten involved in his chaos. I wasn't fired for the affair, but the company tried to restructure and I no longer fit into their plans. I quit before they even managed to start a formal layoff process. I started my own business as a consultant, but it's tough standing on your own without the same network. I managed to survive, but I'm far from the careerist I once was. Now, 3 years later, I've happened to run into Ethan. Or I saw him. He didn't see me. It brought everything back to life. I thought I'd come further, but it's obvious I'm stuck. When Melissa told me he's happy with Maya, a successful and beautiful doctor, I fell apart. I haven't managed to find anyone else. I've had some half-hearted dates, but I don't trust myself. I'm afraid I'll make the same mistake again or get too hurt. I have a thin layer of self-respect left, but it feels fragile. I'm ashamed of my infidelity every day, and I don't know how to forgive myself. These last few days, I've started writing down my thoughts in a journal, and now I'm sharing them here as a kind of therapy. So here are my reflections. Why was I unfaithful? I've thought about that question so much. I think I was looking for excitement, validation, Maybe a feeling of being special. Sometimes I felt taken for granted, but it was probably mostly in my head. Ethan wasn't boring. He was responsible. I was just blinded by the need for something new. Why didn't I break it off when I saw where it was heading? I guess I was too cowardly. I enjoyed the attention from Mark, but I didn't want to leave the security of Ethan. I was greedy and cowardly. I didn't think about the consequences. I just let myself get carried away. And the sex was absolutely amazing. How could I say such nasty things about Ethan in the emails to Mark? It was a game. Something we did in those moments we were together, and it was at its hottest. It's extremely shameful to admit, but it's the truth. How does it feel to see Ethan happy with Maya? It hurts, a lot. But at the same time, part of me is relieved that he didn't go under because of my stupidity. I want him to be happy. I just wish he had been happy with me. It's selfish, I know. How will I ever be able to move on? I don't know yet. I just know I have to. Otherwise, I'll be stuck in the past forever. That's why I'm writing. It's a start. I called Melissa again this morning and asked if she thought there was a chance Ethan and I could talk. Just talk. She said she didn't want to be any kind of go-between, but she could ask him. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I feel a desperate need to say I'm sorry. I've said it before, in letters, in messages, in my thoughts, but I want to say it to him directly. I'm not trying to ruin his relationship with Maya. I'm not trying to get him back. But I need to say that I regret it, that I understand the magnitude of what I've done, and that I truly hoped he would be happy. Melissa promised she'd feel it out carefully. We hung up, and I immediately regretted even asking her. What if I tear open his wounds? What if he's completely uninterested in talking to me? He might just get angry or sad. Or he might be indifferent, which in some way would be even worse. Because no matter how much I try, I don't want to be just a footnote in his life. Someone he barely remembers other than as a warning sign for how bad it can get when trust is broken. I know that might be my fate, but I can't quite accept it. The next day, Melissa called and told me she had mentioned to Ethan that she'd seen me. He hadn't reacted strongly, she said, but she couldn't tell how he felt. He was calm, typical Ethan, and he didn't give a clear answer about whether he wanted to see me or not. He said something like, "I'm not sure what the point would be." I understand him. What would be the point? I don't know either. Maybe just a tiny sense of closure? Even though we already have a legal closure behind us. Melissa suggested I write a letter. Nothing long, just something simple that she could pass on to Ethan. I agreed to it. So I wrote. I kept it short and respectful. I didn't ask for anything. I just said that I'm sorry for everything, that I'm not trying to disrupt his life or demand anything from him. I wrote that I'm glad he found his way to happiness. I also remember how Mark and I, one evening in the early stages of our affair, sat in a hotel bar and I had one glass of wine too many. I told Mark things I never should have shared with anyone outside the marriage. About Ethan's insecurities, about his flaws, about my frustrations. In hindsight, it feels like a double betrayal, not only cheating on him physically, but also betraying his confidences. It was a complete destruction of everything ethical and moral. Sometimes I want to shake my former self and shout, "What are you doing?" But I can't go back in time. I can only be accountable for what I did. I haven't had any contact with Mark since the divorce. He disappeared from my life without any dramatic farewells. Sometimes I wonder what he's doing now, but then I shake off the thought. I don't want to know. That story is dead and buried as far as I'm concerned. I still carry the guilt of ever being drawn to him, but I'm not going to keep giving him space in my head. Life as a freelance consultant is not particularly glamorous. I have a few clients for whom I help with strategy and marketing, but the competition is tough. I try to keep my head above water. It's okay. I manage financially, although it's far from the stable life I had with Ethan. Sometimes the thought pops up, what if I had chosen differently? How would my life look now? Would we have had children? Would we have lived in a house together and maybe gotten a dog like Ethan always talked about? I force those thoughts away because they only hurt. Yet they're unavoidable. Every time I see a nuclear family on the street hugging, it cuts right through me. I threw away the chance for a stable family with a man who loved me.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.